Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the palatial FYC studios, you're listening to For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussion reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm your host, Dustin Friesenan.
And I'm Mike Josick.
Welcome to the show.
And a hearty hello to all the listeners who are catching the show on YouTube, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, all great podcast providers, and also on iTunes. If you're streaming or downloading the show off of Apple Podcasts, and while you're there, we'd strongly encourage you to rate and review the show. It really helps get the podcast into the eyes and ears of potential listeners, brings us up in the podcast standings when people search for this kind of content in the iTunes podcast store. So there you go. If you're a frequent listener of the podcast, thanks for joining us again. And if you are new to the show, be warned, spoilers ahead. So as we discussed on the second All Things Considered double feature recommend review show, for anybody who hasn't caught that, we changed our All Things Considered format. 2 episodes last week, one with Solo, one with 2 interesting films, Free Fire and The Call of Cthulhu. Anyways, we mentioned that this week we're going to be covering a 1970 Billy Wilder I.L. Diamond film, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
AKA the reason why every intelligent character in media these days has to be an asshole.
But just before we get to talking about the film, we've got a couple of below-the-line things that we want to get out of the way. First one, of course, is we've mentioned previously that we were coming up on our 100th release episode of the show. That is this episode. We thought it was going to be next week, but because of the format change with All Things Considered, 2 episodes showed up last week. Therefore, bam, welcome to 100.
It's not 100 of For Your Consideration, but 100 releases, including all the shows, that's still a good milestone. That's something worth celebrating, I'd say.
Not to be mistaken with the television show, The 100. Yeah, you're not even gracing that with a response.
Honestly, if they start mistaking that show for us, that would work for me. Like, whatever, they got some good enough numbers to be on season 5 now.
I think so, yeah. And also, speaking of seasons, while this is our 100th release for the podcast, we're also pretty much like just over a year of you and me doing this show weekly. Back in mid-May of 2017, we decided to really just
buckle down,
put our nose to the grindstone, and make this a weekly show. It was a little bit more irregular prior to that, and I'm pretty proud of that, buddy. We've actually got more than 52 episodes because of some additional stuff that we've done, but this is like, we're a year into weekly episodes.
Take that, half of you webcomic artists.
I feel like that's a milestone, and the 100 releases is a milestone. Although when you think about it, in the last year, we've produced half the episodes that we have in the 2.5 years that we've been operating.
We'll hit these milestones faster is what I'm hearing.
But anyways, the whole point of bringing up the whole 100 episode thing is that we are running a contest to celebrate. So basically what we're doing is, since we're celebrating the 100 episodes of the show, what we are proposing to you guys is to share your favorite episode of the show on Twitter. Hashtag that tweet with hashtag FYC100, and then we will pick a winner, and that winner will receive a DVD or Blu-ray of their choice, sent to you by us at FYC.
And on top of that, we will do a very special FYC episode on that DVD if we haven't already. And if we have, feel free to choose another one. Of course, the DVD itself, we're going to kind of limit it to not being some sort of special edition, diamond-encrusted, where the sleeve is the hollowed-out body of Orson Welles or something ridiculous like that.
The case is inlaid with the beaks of 1,000 eagles.
Signed by every member of the cast in their own blood. Though that would be one hell of a DVD. I don't care what DVD that is of. I'm getting that DVD.
I want to know how the corpse of Orson Welles fits on the shelf. He was a fairly corpulent fellow.
I feel it would be like Lenin, where you have a room dedicated to it and a glass coffin.
Just a glass coffin, yeah.
You charge admission. It makes the money back.
And where does the... I want to know where the liner notes and the disc are held, too. That's...
All I know is inside the hollowed out body, I'm putting a DVD player, putting some cords into it, and having it run whatever DVD it is on loop.
So that's share your favorite episode, any of the last 100 episodes of the show, whether you share it off of YouTube or the podcasting page at libsyn.com/FYC show.
And throw on the hashtag FYC100. And in a few weeks, we will tally that up, go to random.com to get ourselves a random number, and
announce the winner, and some lucky listener will have a present from us.
Is that all we have for Below the Line this week?
Well, we also have something in the way of a new sponsor. Dustin, what do we know about audible.com?
Should you care to download a free audiobook of this film or some other Sherlock Holmes case, if you go to audibletrial.com/FYC show, you can get yourself a free audiobook and support us at the same time.
And there's a ton of choices. I mean, this character's been around for a very, very long time. Just off the top here, I've got the Sherlock Holmes, the Definitive Collection on audible.com. So if that's something that you want to check out, like Dustin said, it helps us out. 30-day free trial, no commitment necessary. And at the end of that 30 days, if you choose not to continue,
you get to keep your book.
All right, well, last thing I want is to get criticized for taking 6.5 minutes to get to the movie again. So,
as well you should have been.
I think we've earned it. I think we've earned the right to take care of some business before we talk about the movie. And that's what the advance thing is for. If we start the episode by saying we got some below-the-line stuff to take care of, maybe we should qualify. If you don't want to hear it, jump ahead a couple minutes. But anyways, let's get to the film and roll the credits on The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which was directed by Billy Wilder. It was produced by I.A.L. Diamond and Billy Wilder. It was written by I.A.L. Diamond and Billy Wilder. It starred Robert Stevens, Genevieve Page, Colin Blakely, and Christopher Lee. Music was by Miklos Roja. Cinematography was by Christopher Chalice. It was edited by Ernest Walter. It was distributed by United Artists and released on the 29th of October, 1970 in the US, 3rd of December, 1970 in the UK. It's a film that has a complicated reception as far as critics are concerned, although generally favorable reviews.
Though it was only voted for by one critic, thus landing it 894th on the critics poll for Sight and Sound Greatest Films of All Time.
It is a film that has influenced a lot of the current Sherlock that goes on. Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss often refer to this movie as a primary influence on the Sherlock TV show that has people all aflutter with...
Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yeah, I was trying to think of a funny way to say his name. I was going to be like Benefield Cumberstone or something.
I always go with Cumberbundle myself.
Cumbersnatch? Dumbledore Cumberbund?
Cumberbundle. Let's grow up here, Michael. It's a real name of a real person, much like Engelbert Humperdinck.
Which isn't actually a real name.
Oh, I know.
He changed
it to that, but that makes it a real name, because that's his name now. He paid money, went to the court. He's like, they're not going to forget my name.
So this was my pick for this week. And Dustin, this was the first time you saw this film. Let's just qualify. The edition of the film that we watched was the Kino Lorber Classics version of the film on DVD. It includes not only the film, but the additional audio sequence with the scenes that were omitted. The 50 minutes of the movie that were essentially cut are on here as a bonus features. So I previously owned the MGM version, grabbed this one for the episode today. It is a worthy thing to seek out if this is a film that tickles your fancy, but I don't think Dustin is going to be seeking this movie out. Am I correct?
This is actually the first Sherlock Holmes film I've seen ever. Any bit
ever?
I've never read anything by him, or...
You haven't even seen those stupid Guy Ritchie, Robert Downey Jr. ones?
I haven't seen nothing. I haven't seen Sherlock on TV. All I know is stuff that I've gleaned from wiki pages and from the cultural zeitgeist, pretty much, is all the information I have on Sherlock. That and parodies.
You haven't even seen, like, the Cumberbatch Blenadoon?
I've not seen Cumberbundle, Benedict Arnold. I've not seen anything until this.
I think that fascinates me more than anything you are about to say over the course of the next 20 or 30 minutes. Although you do often surprise me.
Also, ouch. My feelings, sir. But this film actually got off to a rather rocky start with me. It has the whole scene where Sherlock and Watson are just hanging out at home, and Watson really doesn't want Sherlock to just sit around bored doing cocaine, a 5% solution because he waters it down, and don't think Sherlock didn't notice. So he eventually drags him out to the Russian ballet because there's a famous ballet dancer who's retiring that night, who decides that she's beautiful, Holmes is smart, I want to have his baby to have an Uber baby. Holmes declines this by saying that, Watson and I, like two single guys, bachelors living together for 5 years.
Well, he tries to get out of it several ways, but then he finally has to just trump it by saying, I'm going to disappoint you because Watson and I are together.
And so they accept that, and then they start spreading the word. Outside, Watson is just dancing with, like, all the ladies of the ballet. And the word starts spreading, and all of a sudden all the ladies are like, oh, well, I guess there goes our one man in the orgy, apparently, because all of a sudden every one of them is replaced by dudes. So I guess they were hoping for an orgy. It's really weird. I don't see how that had anything to do with let's just dance around and have fun. But all right. Watson,
there is a definite sex comedy aspect to this film.
Oh, yeah. It was very just gag-filled.
And sometimes I think it works. Most times I don't think it hits the mark the way they want to. Or maybe it's just, this movie's almost 50 years old.
No. It was some weird shtick, and it felt very I almost want to say Marx Brothers bit to me. Of course, that's just
completely wrong.
Completely wrong. 100% wrong. I can't come up with what it felt like to me right now. I can't describe it. It had a very familiar feeling, but
it kind of reminds me of sort of Blake Edwards or Robert Altman in the way that it approaches some of the comedy aspects, but also feels very Billy Wilder to me. I'm not sure. Have you seen any other Billy Wilder movies? Are you familiar with? Have you seen The Apartment or Sunset Boulevard or
Nope.
The Front Page
Nope.
or Some Like It Hot?
No.
Okay.
But that's not what lost me. At this point, though, Watson starts losing his mind. He's like, I need a drink. Then he runs back home and he's shouting at Holmes, talking about how, you don't know what this is going to do to us. What it's going to do to me. I'll be ruined.
Which is legit for the time period.
It's legit for the time period.
And
but
for the British gentleman.
Yeah, like he's going to lose his pension. He's a doctor. He's going to lose everything.
Well, he's afraid that he might.
Yeah, and he's losing his mind completely. And that's sort of where it lost me. It's like, okay, I understand that back in the day, like, that's a bit of an issue, but wow. Like, calm your shit, Watson. And eventually he's like, wait a second, like,
it does lead to
we've got our reputations. Like, everyone knows how much of a ladies' man I am. And you've been with a lady, right? Right? And so the rest of the film, in my mind, is effectively proof that Sherlock Holmes isn't a poofter, because that's the most important thing going on right now.
I think that's one of the most fascinating things about the movie in general is the asexual quality, the ambiguous sexuality of the character. Robert Stevens plays him in a very confident but effete way. There's that great line where he says, I may be being presumptuous, but you have been with women, haven't you, Holmes? And he goes, yes, you are being presumptuous.
I love that line.
Which is a great line. Yeah. And I love the joke, too, where, you were talking about how frustrating that scene with Watson freaking out was. I felt the exact same way, and I felt that smoothed out a little bit as the story went on. But where he's trying to figure out, like, what's the way out of this? He's like, maybe if we get married.
Well, then they'll really talk.
And Holmes just had such a great response. And it's one of the things that I love about Stevens' portrayal as Holmes. I know he's not kind of everybody's favorite Holmes, but there is that ambiguity to it. There's a malaise to him. There's an ennui. He's bored. He's often bored.
That's why he does cocaine for fun when he's bored.
And this movie, it's called The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, but by the end of the movie, you really haven't gotten that peak. He's very... I think more than anything, the title speaks to sort of the subversion of the tropes from the original kind of Holmes stories and how Holmes is traditionally portrayed. Right off the bat, Holmes talks about, well, you've put this in your stories and now people expect me to wear, the deer hunter cap. No, it's not a deer hunter cap. What are they called?
Oh, I forget.
The hats. He expects them to wear the hats.
And the capes.
And he makes the joke about,
he's a misogynist.
As you say in your stories, the game is afoot, stuff like that. He plays this sort of ironic bent to that they show a more complicated Holmes, I think. And honestly, one of my favorite things about this movie is Holmes plays a passive role as well. I mean, he kind of drives things, but by the end of the movie, Holmes doesn't solve the case.
No, Holmes completely bungles the whole thing. Like,
Holmes doesn't solve any case in this movie.
This entire movie is actually a bit of a waste of time.
It's more of a character piece, and it's more of a, there's things going on, and you get to see Robert Stevens as Holmes reacting to everything, including Watson, including Geneviève Bujold's character, who has both a Belgian and German name, which I can't remember at this time. And I think the movie really shines in the subtle moments. I think when it tries to be a Holmes mystery is where it stumbles. And I know that's coming... I just sort of traveled very far away from the original point, which was sort of the sexuality of the piece.
As far as I'm concerned, he's effectively asexual. His romantic life is completely irrelevant, but that seems to be what this film is trying to focus on. At the beginning, they point out how he's sort of portrayed as being misogynist, and he's like, no, I don't hate women. I just don't trust them, you see.
But he goes through the list of women that he's been involved in, and they've either been arsonists, terrorists. They all end up to be brilliant.
It's weird when you're working in the criminal field. All the people you meet are either criminals or policemen. It's strange that way how it works.
They're all criminal, genius sociopaths, and I think he just retreats from that entirely, and he just chooses to be asexual, as you said. And I think he plays with Watson because he knows he can get a rise out of Watson. And although they continue to try to allude to sort of a romantic entanglement between Holmes and Gabrielle, whose name I now know because I looked it up online, there is no culmination of that. There is no... They don't kiss, they don't embrace, there's this intellectual respect that he gains for her near the end when he realizes how duplicitous she actually is, how she's pulled one over on him.
The thing is, he was interested in her beforehand. That's why he was so disappointed that she pulled one over on him.
He wasn't disappointed, though. He was thrilled.
Well, she was saying, oh, I bet you had me caught from the get-go. And he's like, yeah, definitely.
I don't think Holmes was sexually or romantically interested in her. I think it was purely intellectual, and I think what you see at the end has more to do with him having not liked her through the entire movie and then gone, oh, you are far more than I ever expected you to be. This is interesting. It's unfortunate you're a German spy, and we're going to have to send you away. But he does the thing where he arranges for her to actually get traded to go back so that she doesn't go to jail. There's that cute scene, I think, where she's doing the signaling for the Auf Wiedersehen. And then he's sad when she dies because I think this is one of the first people that he's been able to connect with, in a way.
As I said, that slow voice that he had when she sort of gets revealed, I feel that is sort of the proof that he was leaning into her romantically a little bit, which is what this whole film seems to be about. It's about will he, won't he, in a way that sort of goes with his character of being fairly aloof, but shows a bit more of his private side in more of a realistic way, because as he says at the beginning, I'm not exactly who it is that you're portraying in your books, in your stories. When he's talking to Watson, who, by the way, if he's writing these stories and these are his kids reading them later on, he's portraying himself as a complete sycophant because his nose is so far up Sherlock Holmes' ass that he can smell his breath.
I think he's okay with it, though.
That is who he is. It's just in complete awe of Holmes, which is probably why he does nothing but live with this guy and write down his stories, which makes sense. When Mycroft is the guy who's just way the heck better than Holmes, but I feel like he's also better to the point where it's just ridiculous. I like the idea of Mycroft, where Holmes has this brother who's just so much smarter than he is. But when they get the letter from him as they're doing the stakeout that says the exact minute... What a terrible stakeout,
too.
They're just hiding by the window. But they get the letter that says, yeah, by my calculations, you'll get this letter at 12:40. What time do you have, Watson? 12:43. Well, then, either Mycroft is wrong or your watch is off. And knowing Mycroft, you better reset your watch. So it's like, okay, so what you're telling me here is that Mycroft knows exactly what's happening with you to the extent that he can tell how you're going to deduce things and where you'll be at this exact point, knowing the clues that he has and how he's going to discern them, which means that you already know that this lady's a spy because you know all this later on, yet you're not telling him. You're setting this whole thing up, hoping that he's eventually going to find you, knowing that he's going to completely disobey your direct order to not follow him, pretty much so that you can kill all the spies. Because that's how I'm reading this.
I have two responses to that. One, I'm okay with Mycroft being that smart. I think Wilder and Diamond are playing with the trope and the character by having that scene with the 1140 and the 1143. Well, you better change your watch. And Mycroft,
even just getting it there.
Mycroft is sort of the genius behind everything. Like he basically runs the country.
And the reason why he's not interesting as a character is because he's too good, but they have him as a side character because as I said, I appreciate the interesting fact that Holmes isn't the smartest one, and you've got these people who are much smarter than him, and Holmes can fail, which is important in a hero, which is why Superman sucks. But
Superman doesn't suck.
That is a debate for another day, sir.
For December.
A gaze into the future.
December 2018, 40th anniversary, Superman the movie.
But that's why Mycroft, your Croft, his Croft, her Croft, Lara Croft, Bancroft. That's why Mycroft can't be the main character, because that would be just so dull. He'd walk into a room, say, yeah, it was that person right there.
He's the puppeteer. He's the guy pulling the strings behind everything. And he probably is already 6 steps ahead of everybody. And he's just telling Holmes, you know what, just drop the case. Just stay out of it. He doesn't...
Stay at home, do some cocaine.
And he's probably not going to tell Holmes, oh, by the way, she's a German spy, yada, 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 because they have that competition between themselves, and he basically knows that there's no way that this is going to go badly for him, and if anything, it will just embarrass Holmes. And if Holmes drops it, that's fine, and if Holmes doesn't drop it, well, we'll just take care of it down the line.
AKA, being even smarter than Holmes, he's got to be a bigger asshole. Because that's how this works.
Absolutely.
Just the egos on these guys. And Holmes...
It's interesting hearing...
He's a bit of a sociopath, too, because anytime anyone's showing emotion, like, in theory, her husband just died. She's distraught, and he's like, stop crying! I've got questions to ask you!
I love that scene because Holmes, doesn't want to tap into any kind of emotion or supporting sort of inclinations. He doesn't really know how to deal with women because his conflicted relationship with women in the past has basically forced him to retreat into ultimately an asexual position. Also, what she's doing is going to break their cover and make it more difficult for them to continue. So I think there's a lot going on in that scene. And also, she's faking the crying.
He doesn't know that yet.
He doesn't know that
until the very end when she's outed by some other means other than him. He doesn't even out her.
But I feel like that scene works the first time through because of what it tells you about Holmes and what's going on there. And then the second time through, you have that extra narrative that you're working with, and you realize, she's faking it, and he's, I think to a certain extent, faking it himself. He doesn't want to fall into sentimentality. He doesn't know how to deal with the sentimentality because he is... It was really interesting. I watched an interview with Christopher Lee who was talking about the character of Holmes, and he talked about him as being, genius and assertive, incredibly intolerant. There were just as many negatives as positive to go with the character. He doesn't think that Holmes is a pleasant person. He thinks he's an interesting character, but he's not a nice guy.
If you look at House MD, who's effectively supposed to be a modern-day Holmes with a drug addiction, who's a sociopath, who's a genius, blah, 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 based on Holmes, yeah, this is the trope that really came out of Sherlock, that if you're a genius, you got to be a sociopath.
I don't know if you have to, but I think it does happen a lot.
It happens far too often, and it's so annoying.
I think that's just the nature of drama, though. I mean, if you have a character who can do these things... I mean, you said yourself, this is a problem with Superman, because he can do anything, and he also has a really great moral compass.
So you really got to struggle to find any sort of actual drama, and it's usually in the other characters.
Whereas Holmes, he basically was the Superman of the 19th century, and
he goes around not telling Watson all of the information that he has, and Watson is just confused and can't piece any of it together until Holmes later on is like, oh yeah, well that happened because of this, that, and the other.
But you make that genius character an asshole because it creates drama.
Exactly. If he told us when he knew what he knew, then it would presumably be far less interesting, which is why you can't have Mycroft as the main character, because he'd just walk in and be like, yeah, she's a spy. Movie over.
And these would be like single-page, 5-minute mysteries where somebody would come in and they would be like, so we have this mystery, and Holmes would just be like, this is what the thing is. Go check out this person. We're done.
First off, having watched Rick and Morty, I know that is an awesome TV show. Who did this murder? The murderer was me. Put on the cuffs, please, and thank you.
Oh, that was the interdimensional cable.
Yeah.
With the really bad unsolved mysteries.
It was short mysteries.
It was the short mysteries.
Short mysteries,
yeah.
And they were all like 3 seconds long, and they were great. So, I don't know what you're talking about here.
I do agree that this movie has a rough beginning. I told you while watching it, that first half an hour, I had to stop because I've watched this movie in the past and I quite liked the movie and I was looking forward to doing it.
But the first half hour is basically shtick.
It is shtick. And we were talking about this before sitting down for the recording. I mentioned that there was 50 minutes of material that was excised from the film. Some of it lost, some of it recovered. All of it kind of on the DVD and Blu-ray release for anybody to check out if they want to, which I did. And it's interesting because, we've had this discussion on the show before about I love brevity, although you wouldn't think that by some of my intros. And I love efficiency of storytelling. I like it when the fat is cut. It's one of the reasons why I love filmmakers like Soderbergh. But sometimes, like in the case of The Two Towers, maybe you do need a 3.5-hour movie. Maybe you do need to either take these characters right out, or if you're going to include them, flesh it out. Give them a reason for being there. And I kind of wonder, because this movie was originally structured to be 4 stories. As it stands, it's 2 stories. It's the ballerina story. It's the submarine story with Mycroft and the German spies. It was supposed to be those 2 stories, plus a story about a corpse in an upside-down room, which was Watson trying to give Holmes something complicated to cheer him up. And it was a story about 2 bodies found on a ship that they were traveling on, and they go to solve the case. And Watson is like, hey, how about I take this case for a change? And Sherlock is like, okay, sure. Now, adding 50 minutes to a 125-minute movie...
That's how long this was?
Yeah.
Wow.
Making this a 3-hour movie, I don't know if that's a great idea, but I kind of wonder if putting those other stories in, if it would give it more of an anthology feel, if it would flesh out the rhythm of the narrative, you would have those natural breaks between the stories so that it wasn't just switching from one story to the next story halfway through and have that weird, or sorry, not halfway through, because it's half an hour of the one story and then you've got an hour and a half covering the submarine and spies. But it's an interesting thing, which I've never sat down and watched it as sort of an uncut, cobbled together piece.
Because that doesn't really exist.
I think the biggest problem of this movie is its structure.
I feel that the film itself, like you've got the shtick part, you've got the pseudo-romance, you've got the mystery going on, and it's trying to be 3 things at once, and it fails at all of them because of it.
Billy Wilder often balances the comedy with real drama and switching seamlessly between the two. And I feel like he and Diamond were trying that here, but because some of it was played so broadly, I feel like it, and theatrically, this movie is staged very theatrically. The way the sets are built, the way the characters' movements are blocked, the way the scenes are blocked, very theatrical, and how it's shot. So combine that with some of the really broad Watson humor, even some of the winking and nudging.
Petrov, half and half.
I think it sort of vacillates between the two, and there's an inconsistency. I think there's a lack of balance, and I wonder if the other 50 minutes would have provided that. As it is, I think it's entertaining, but it's kind of a complicated film to resolve.
And at the end of the day, like we said, or like I said at the beginning, Holmes just wasted his time this whole film. He didn't even want to go to the ballet because he hates ballet, so he really shouldn't have done that in the first place. He didn't solve the mystery. All he did was keep her alive a little bit longer to fail at spying elsewhere and get herself killed. And Mycroft very specifically murdered those spies.
Oh, yeah. He was like, let's get him in the sub and then we'll just...
blow it up. That is actually the biggest shock in the movie to me. I was expecting, oh, you arrest them, but nope. He's like, nope, we're just going to flat out murder.
I love that.
I appreciated that, actually.
I thought you would appreciate the fact that Holmes is suffering from severe ennui, and that's why he's kind of floating through the story the way he's floating through the story. You know what? When you're depressed, when you're not happy, you don't want to go out and be in public. You don't want to get dragged where people are going to constantly go, oh, look at my shoes and tell me where I've been. And because he's a celebrity as well. And every time he goes out, people are like basically trying to get him to perform. They're always throwing mysteries at him. They're always... He's tired.
And he wants the interesting mysteries. Those are that's the thing that gives him the joie de vivre.
Yeah.
And presumably this was that kind of mystery. So this isn't him depressed. This is him actually wanting to be on the case.
But he starts off depressed. You mentioned going to the ballet.
He starts off depressed, and that all works. But as I said, it's trying to balance the pseudo-romance with the shtick and the mystery, and it almost doesn't know what it wants to be. But the overarching idea that they have, the whole private life of the is he, isn't he gay at the beginning, the will they, won't they actually show any sort of affection towards each other as they get closer during the mystery scene, it's effectively all about his romantic life. And I personally don't think it really had any bearing on anything. He's supposed to be there to solve mysteries. And it almost becomes the mystery of why Sherlock Holmes is cocking everything up. Also, is he one of those guys? One of them?
Communist? Republican?
We got a red theme going on here.
Martian? What did you think of the ending? Before we get into the judgment phase, I think the ending needs to be addressed. I loved it. I love the fact that he's despondent. He says, where is it? Watson actually concedes this is not something he's going to fight.
Well, he just lost his almost maybe romantic partner in the future, possibly.
I thought it was considering some of the mixed tones of the movie, it was a really interesting way to go out. Especially since they cut the epilogue, which had Inspector Lestrade come in and mention the Jack the Ripper thing, which goes off on a little bit more of a jaunty tone. This is just door closes, Watson sits down to write. It's very...
Yeah, basically the whole thing was just, for a little bit, he wasn't so despondent that he needed the cocaine. That was a week in his life. I think he was almost happy for a little bit.
I think that's a fascinating aspect of the character, that this person lives in kind of a dark place most of the time. And this is where he finds his joy.
Presumably, anyway.
Did you think it was a good ending? Or were you already so kind of burnt out on the whole concept by that point?
I was definitely kind of burnt out on the concept by the whole point. I'd actually completely forgotten the ending before you mentioned it to me even.
Where he pushes Holmes off the bell tower and then...
Now we're just being silly. Well, anything that happened after he was sad because he learnt of her death, completely forgotten. Did not stick with me at all.
Fair enough.
But hearing it now, yeah, it is a good bookend, but...
Not a good movie end.
No, a good bookend in a movie is a good movie end. Like, what are you talking about?
A bookend or a movie end?
He's trying to make puns here. I'm not going to feed the beast. Terrible. Falls flat. Much like I feel the movie did.
Oh, you may think this is funny, but we're both in the same boat. We must take desperate measures. We must stop this talk. Maybe if we got married.
Then they'd really talk.
Obviously. We cannot continue to live under the same roof. We must move apart.
Of course, we can still see each other clandestinely, on remote benches in Hyde Park and in the waiting rooms of suburban railway stations.
This whole thing's ridiculous. We have nothing to hide.
That's what I've been trying to tell you.
Let somebody start a rumor. Just one ugly word. We'll sue him for slander.
No one would dare. After all, you have an enviable record with the fair sex.
Damn right. I can get women from 3 continents to testify for me, and you can get women to vouch for you too, can't you, Holmes? Can you, Holmes?
Good night, Watson.
Holmes? Let me ask you a question. I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but there have been women in your life.
The answer is yes. You're being presumptuous.
And thus going on to the judgment phase of the show. As I said, the movie tries to be too many different things, and I feel it fails at pretty much all of them. The mystery itself, all I could see was Holmes withholding information, and the big surprise at the end is that Mycroft was withholding more information.
And he murdered some German spies.
And he murdered some German spies, which I found amusing, for sure. But like the whole thing was a waste of Holmes's time, the whole thing was almost a waste of my time. The movie was very middle of the road, and it's not a good introduction to Sherlock Holmes, I don't think, for me.
I don't think this movie is supposed to be an introduction to Sherlock Holmes. I think this is a story for people familiar with some Holmes, either literary or cinematic.
Oh, absolutely. When you talk about the private life of Sherlock Holmes, you have to care about Sherlock Holmes to care about his private life.
At some point, this film
is the first Sherlock Holmes film that I've ever seen. At
some point, this film was actually marketed as the private sex life of Sherlock Holmes, to make it seem a little more tawdry and exotic, which is just like so mistitled.
Well, it's probably the most sex that he's ever gotten, seeing a naked chick and being propositioned by another. It makes him almost like Bond, because there were 2 Bond girls, and one turned out to be a villain.
Whoa. Dustin just brought something to the table.
And like Bond, he just blunders about a whole lot until everything gets solved around him.
And one of them dies. So, would you consider this film... Well, obviously you're not going to consider this film a masterpiece, but do you consider it a museum piece?
It's something you could throw in a museum. It's not so terrible as to withhold from the museum. But it's hanging out probably in the museum's museum where 90% of the art of the Louvre is hiding out when it's not being viewed by the general public. It's something for somebody who wants to see more Sherlock Holmes, pretty much. I don't even know what the regular Sherlock Holmes looks like, so it's really hard to compare, in all honesty. But it's not something I'm really going to remember or go back to, I don't feel. Not something that was really gripping.
I was surprised when I saw this movie on the list. I was even more surprised when I did a little bit of pre-research and found out how many people love this movie, like love this movie. So that kind of got me more enthused to go into it, because like I said, previously when I saw it, I owned this movie, I enjoyed it, but it was a much different experience this time around, and from early on, I knew this was not going to be a masterpiece. I spent the rest of the film just deciding whether or not whether I was genuinely entertained, whether I thought it was trying some interesting things, whether I liked performances, writing, various things that just wouldn't have me kick this thing to the curb. And ultimately, I was entertained. I love many of the performances. I think Robert Stevens is a great Holmes. I think Christopher Lee is a great Mycroft. I loved how Queen Victoria comes in and she's like, "Where's the glass bottom?"
That's not the point, ma'am.
And then she finds out it's a warship and she's like, "I don't approve," or "We don't approve," and scuttle it. And then she walks away, and I thought, what a great... I think there's so many great subversions of tropes and ideas in this movie. I think it's very clever. I think what it's trying to do is bold and interesting, and I'm not at all surprised coming from Billy Wilder and Izzy Diamond. But I just think it's inconsistent. It's lacking some balance. I wish it had a stronger through line. And I mean, you get introduced, there's that prologue where they're unpacking all the stuff, and you've got the voiceover saying, "These are the stories that were not publishable back in the day," and that's never revisited.
If it were an anthology, I definitely would have had that breaking up the different stories and then go back to maybe not even go back to it at the end, but at least that would make it a much more anthology feel. And I do like my anthologies.
And I think it would have imposed some structure on the movie that doesn't currently exist. So definitely I am going to vote museum piece on The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
That belongs in a museum!
I will definitely revisit it. I'm curious enough now that it's fresh in my mind to go back.
Maybe check it out with all the other deleted scenes thrown in, see how that messes with the direction.
That was a really nice bonus of the DVD that I picked up, that Kino Lorber version with the extra stuff. I'm kind of excited to check it out. I checked out one of the stories and it really piqued my interest. So definitely, if you're going to check out this movie, find that edition. Find the Kino Lorber DVD or Blu-ray. It's got all the stuff. Also, an interview with the editor and Christopher Lee, which wasn't too shabby at all.
And let us know what you think of the film.
Post your comments on our YouTube comment section, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Like, share, follow, subscribe to all the social media. Share us with your friends, share us with your family, spread the word of the show. Don't forget, we have the contest running, hashtag FYC100. Share your favorite episode of the last 100 episodes of FYC on Twitter with that hashtag, and the winner will get a DVD or Blu-ray of their choice.
And a review of their choice.
And we will cover the film as an episode of the show. We also have the Patreon at patreon.com/FYC show. If you want to support the show in a financial capacity, check out the breakdown of that at the beginning of our solo episode, which came out last week. And there's also the blog, wordpress.com/FYC show, where we post reviews, articles, thoughts, afterthoughts, considerations, all that sort of stuff.
And of course, audibletrial.com/FYC show in order to get yourself a free audiobook, even if you decide to cancel out of the free 30 days.
Grab a Sherlock Holmes book. Grab one of the individual stories. Grab one of the collections, the complete works. It's all available there. So what are we looking at for next week, Dustin?
Next week, we are looking at a film that I had not seen during my old days of watching horrible, gut-wrenching films that are the hardest films to watch. My old edgelord days in college. Irreversible. Irreversible.
Gaspar Noé. Or is it no? I think it's Noé.
No way is it no.
Wow. Wow. And you're going to give me shit for the last fun?
I will, sir.
I know he's an Argentinian who lived in France and he made French films. Really looking forward to it. Just actually picked that one up on DVD. And Monica Bellucci, Vincent Cassel, Gaspar is a crazy interesting director. The parts where we're not crying should be fun.
So until next time, I've been your host, Dustin Friesenand.
And I've been your host, Mike Josick.
Take care.
Bye.
Holmes appeared in the highest resolution, so clearly and independent.
I don't know how that's going to turn out.